Welcome to the Chapter 24 overview. This overview will be in several parts, and it is a truly huge overview. There's a lot going on in Europe at this time, and it's compounded by the fact that the book goes into this section in quite a bit of detail. So I'm going to expect that you reading the chapter can pull out pieces of detail and examples of what I'm going to be trying to show you in the flipped classroom. So this chapter is called The Transformation of Europe. And it is truly a transformation in terms of religion, politics, economy, society. Everything changes in Europe during this time. And so I like to call this chapter a gold mine and a minefield because there's a lot of really neat stuff to find in it, a lot of cool information, but it can also be quite overwhelming. Also, Europe gets very wealthy at this time. However, they tend to argue amongst themselves a lot and have extremely bloody wars. And one of the wars is what this map is all about here. You can see the different religions and how in 1400 this map would have been entirely Catholic. But after the Protestant Reformation, as you can see, different religions are mixed within these countries. Not Spain. Spain is very Catholic. They make sure of that with the Reconquista. But in places like France, Germany, even England and Ireland and Scotland, you can see that there's some religious diversity. And this causes some problems for these groups. Also, you can see Eastern Orthodox is still hanging in there, and then Anatolia onward, that's pretty much Islamic territory. So, profound changes began to overtake Europe beginning in the 16th century. Christianity, which had served as the main unifying element in Europe after the collapse of the Roman Empire, really the glue of medieval Europe, came apart and the church experienced the Protestant Reformation. This led to a fragmentation of the church. The age also witnessed the rise of strong, centralized European states, much like we see today, although not entirely at all. The advent of capitalism ensured that the competition between these new states would be fought on the economic as well as the political and religious fronts. And the scientific revolution and enlightenment signaled the starting of intellectual transformation. This point we will be saving until period 5. The bottom line is that 1450 to 1750 was a highly disruptive time, but these things work together to strengthen Europe as well. So we're going to begin with the Protestant Reformation. No more glue. The religious unity of Western Europe was challenged by Martin Luther because of problems within the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church had been the one and only authority for many years, and with that long authority came corruption. There were problems within the church. There was a lot of corruption of church officials. There was immorality, like popes having children and keeping them around, as well as indulgences that were being sold to people for an absolvance of their sins, their transgressions. We'll talk a little bit more about that in class. And then also there was absenteeism. Many people felt as though their representatives or their church officials, weren't really there for them, and in fact they were more concerned with money and power than they were with their parishioners. Excuse me. So into this comes Martin Luther. Martin Luther was actually a Catholic monk who was appalled by the hypocrisy and the immorality of the Catholic Church. And he attacked the practice really at first of selling indulgences. Now, Martin Luther's message, if it had come 50 years earlier, would probably have never been heard. But by 1517, Europe was in the printing age. The first Bible, the first printed Bible in Europe, printed by Gutenberg, Johannes Gutenberg, was printed in 1455. And the printing press allowed for papers to be distributed rapidly throughout Europe because nothing had to be hand printed anymore. Now, this printing press was explosive because ideas could spread so much more rapidly to more people. While Luther proposed specific reforms in his 95 Theses, such as closing monasteries and translating the Bible into the vernacular, the language everybody spoke, because it was the Bible at that time was in Latin, and Martin Luther thought that the Bible should be the source of authority. His most radical stance was that he refused to recognize papal authority. He was, in fact, a scholar of the Bible, and so he believed that the only true source of Christian religious authority should reside in the Bible, not in the Pope. This was incredibly earth-shattering for Germany and led to a lot of violence, which we'll talk about in a little bit. Other reformers included approaches that were quite different than Martin Luther's. In England, we have Henry VIII. This was a much more political move by Henry. Not only did the church control much of the land, but Henry wanted a divorce. And in order to get this divorce from a Catholic wife, he had to banish the church. So he basically came up with his own church, the Anglican Church, in which he could be the head. And we'll talk about that a little bit in class, a little bit more. So the Anglican Church was started by Henry VIII, and in this he got his divorce. He married Anne of Boleyn. He had another daughter with her, Queen Elizabeth, and then decided that things weren't working out and had his wife beheaded. And he had many more wives after that. But Henry VIII started the Anglican Church. John Calvin was a lawyer. He was French, and he started the Calvinist sect, of course named after him. And in France, his followers were called Huguenots. Now, in his book, Institutes of the Christian Religion, he summarized and organized Protestant thought, and he also brought in this concept of predestination. This is the idea that God knows if you are going to heaven or hell and whatever else you're going to do in your life before you live your life. God is all-knowing. That's his logic behind it. But of course, predestination conflicts with free will. So this was pretty controversial. Many people who signed up for Calvinism, who believed in predestination, were the elites of France. Now this follows logic. If you are a wealthy individual, of course you feel like you're a chosen person. You're under the thumb of the Catholic Church. They're controlling you. If you want to become a part of a different religion, you might choose one that has a group of people who are predestined to go to heaven. This group was called the elect and made up a lot of the elites in French society. That's going to become important in a little bit. Now here we have our three reformers. This is Martin Luther. This is Henry. And this is John Calvin. It would be really a mistake to view the Catholic efforts at reform as nothing more than a reaction to Luther and Calvin, but the Catholic Reformation was really slow and halting until the middle years of the 16th century. So this definitely spurred them on. The Council of Trent, which met on and off from 1545 to 1563, both redressed specific abuses or made reforms, and also reaffirmed traditional Catholic theology. For example, indulgences were scaled back, but they were still allowed and around. One of the biggest thing that happens during the Catholic Reformation is that Saint Ignatius Loyola founds the Society of Jesus, which is the Jesuits. The Jesuits stressed education and carried their missionary zeal to India, China, Japan, the Philippines, and the Americas. So they carried the Catholic message all over the world to all these different European colonies. And you might know that St. John's is a Jesuit university, and there are many other Jesuit universities around around the country. They still hold a lot of power in educational field. Also, the Pope is the first Jesuit Pope right now. That's where we're going to stop for the first part of the presentation.